Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. Alhamdulillah, I feel very blessed to have this opportunity. And Jazakallah khair to Brother Hassan. I don't see you, but thank you for facilitating and inviting me and introducing me. I want to talk about a very important topic about raising children and about the environment in which our children are growing up and the influences on our children. And I think this is a very pertinent topic given that many of you are parents. So if you're a parent, can you raise your hand? Okay, mashallah. And if you're a college student or younger, raise your hand. Okay, so inshallah, I hope that this will be very relevant and pertinent to you. Let me just give you a little background about myself and my story and why you might think that I have something to contribute or some ideas to contribute on this subject of parenting, Islam, and raising children in this cultural environment. So my full name is Daniel Haligatju. My last name is Haligatju. People ask me, well, what does that mean? What's the background? It's a Persian last name. It's Persian, and Haqiqat is Haqiqat, meaning truth, from Haq, of course. And Jew, so it doesn't mean the true Jew. That's not the last name. It means, in Persian, seeker of truth. Jew means seeker. So Haqiqat is seeker of truth. So I'm not actually a convert. Both of my parents are Muslim. I was raised as a Muslim. But I didn't really have much of a connection to a Muslim identity. I didn't feel very connected to Islam at all. And for the most part, I was living life as a typical teenage American. What happened later in life, alhamdulillah, as I got through high school, is I came into contact with good Muslim brothers in high school and then later in college, and they influenced me in a positive way. And alhamdulillah, this was a blessing from Allah, but it could have gone any number of different directions. I could have met other people. I might have come into contact with others who were not Muslim, and my entire life could have taken another direction where I didn't identify as a Muslim, I didn't practice Islam, I didn't uphold any of the tenets of Iman, belief. So alhamdulillah, I was blessed that Allah put certain people in my path and allowed me to learn from them and take from their example. I ended up going to Harvard University for my undergraduate studies. I studied physics and I studied philosophy. And as an undergraduate, this was a time where I was just getting more and more familiar with my Muslim identity. I started praying regularly, fasting, and being more concerned about what does Allah want from me? How am I going to stand before Allah and answer for the way that I'm living my life? And that was the consciousness that came in this period in college. But at the same time, I felt a large wave of attack on my faith and attack on my Muslim identity. This was through my classes. So as if you're in college or you've been through college, you know that there is a large secular influence, an atheistic influence in college. And so I felt that pressure. I felt Islam specifically was being attacked. This was happening in the Islamic studies departments, in philosophy departments, in cultural study departments, and just on campus in general. This was shortly after 9/11, this was still the Bush era, Bush presidency, and so there was a lot of social, intellectual, academic pressure on Muslims. So this was the context in which I was coming to learn more about Islam and coming into practicing as a Muslim and learning in general. So I felt pressure, but I responded to that pressure by wanting to learn more. Well, Islam has this to say about life. Allah says this in the Quran about how to live your life and how to be with other people and how to pray and how to worship and how to understand the world at large. And you have a university environment at Harvard and elsewhere that is attacking that and is critiquing that and is saying, you know, Islam is wrong about this issue, about there being a God. Islam is wrong about there being one God worthy of worship. Islam is wrong about this man, Muhammad ﷺ, being the final messenger. Because actually, you know, everyone has their own religious beliefs, and who's to judge whether one religion is right or wrong? We have to be tolerant and pluralistic. So anyone who says otherwise is wrong, and in fact is committing a moral wrong by saying this. So, scientifically, Islam is backwards. So all these different intellectual and moral critiques. And that's what I think all our youth in the world even, not even just in the American context, but increasingly in the world due to the influence of the internet and social media, is facing, is constant attack that Islam is intellectually irrational, Islam is morally wrong. And so we face this as youth, and what happens? What ends up happening? We see the signs all around us. Every community that I visit across the country, I hear stories of youth who are leaving Islam completely. They're abandoning Islam. And these aren't youth that had no connection to Islam in the first place. These were Muslims who were young Muslims who were coming to the masjid. They were, some of them were even huffaz. They had memorized the Quran. They were leading Taraweeh in Ramadan. And there was even one story where I was in New Jersey and this mother came to me crying that her teenage son, he had studied in one of the best Islamic schools. He had gone overseas to Turkey and had studied, he had finished memorizing the Quran. And then he went to college, and by the end of his freshman year, he had left Islam. He had decided that, you know, Islam doesn't make sense. I have these issues, and he could list them, 1, 2, 3, that don't make sense to me, and I don't understand how a prophet of God could come and teach this, and this, and this. And I don't accept that, so I can't be Muslim anymore. So there's a certain percentage of our youth who fall into this category where they completely leave. There's another larger section of our community that they don't know what they don't know. They don't recognize that their iman, there's a problem with it. There's a problem in that they don't believe the right beliefs. They have the wrong beliefs about Allah. They're influenced by other ideas that are found within society. One quick example, one thing that I often hear youth say, and I'm surprised by it, is that, well, there's no way that we can know that Allah exists. There's no way that you can truly, absolutely know that Allah exists and that Islam is the truth. And these are Muslims, or they have grown up and they view themselves as Muslims, but they think that this is something that's okay to believe. And the reality is that Allah says, فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. فَاعْلَمْ. Allah says, know, He commands, know that there is no God except Allah. So Allah wouldn't command us to do something, to know something, if it were not possible. Right? And this is one of to have iman, to have belief, you have to know. That's one of the conditions of having iman, is to know that Allah exists. Along with other beliefs, to know that the malaika exists, to know that the messengers were sent, to know that there are kutub that were revealed to the messengers, that there's a last day, that the qadr is a reality. These are all points of knowledge. You can't have iman and be considered a believer if you don't accept and know these things to be true. So that's just an example of confusion and doubts that are facing our youth. And these stem, again, I mentioned at the beginning, there's intellectual and moral doubts. And in my personal story, in my personal life, I had to confront these questions and these issues because I had these same doubts. I had these same confusions. And there wasn't really available resources to help me address and to answer these questions and issues. And so, inshallah, as a community, we're learning and we're improving in providing and being able to provide these kinds of answers and resources. And that's what, as an introduction to myself, I've dedicated kind of full time to creating resources and to writing on these intellectual and moral challenges to Islam. And I do it from a background of having studied these traditions, these intellectual ideologies that are attacking Islam and Muslims. And this is the reflection that I want to share with you, is that it's not a coincidence that we see youth in different parts of the world all bringing up the same questions and the same issues, right? It's not coincidence that youth in Tampa, Florida might be asking, well, why do men pray in front of women? How is that just? How is that fair in Islam? Why doesn't Islam accept or acknowledge freedom and equality the way the rest of the world does? Why don't we find this concept of secularism and separation of church and state within the Quran? Why? Isn't that the most ideal form of government, separation of church and state? Why isn't that found in the Quran? Isn't the Quran from God? Doesn't God know what's the best form of governance? We grow up in the school system here learning that separation of church and state is the ideal form of government that provides the most justice for the most people. Why isn't that found in Islam? Why doesn't Allah clearly spell that out in the Quran? These are some of the questions that arise. But it's not just local to Tampa or to the United States or to North America or to Europe. It's all over the world. All of these shubuhat, all of these doubts. You can find the same exact even expression of these issues as far as Indonesia, Turkey, South Africa, and America, all over the world. So is this a coincidence? Is this just chance that everyone's raising the same issues? No, it's not. It's all based from the same root. It's all coming from the same usul. There's standard ideologies that are taught and exported all across the world. Just like TV, satellite, and internet is broadcast all over the world and everyone is consuming the same kinds of things, these ideologies and these philosophies have been exported and transported all over the world, and they've colonized and affected, brainwashed, indoctrinated the Muslim mind. So if there's a systematic, what I'm trying to get across to you is that this is a systematic problem. It's a systematic problem. I've shared my experience, and I'm sure any of you who are younger especially have also experienced these things in your life. And if there's a systematic problem, you have to have a systematic response. If there's a systematic problem, you have to have a systematic response. If your opponent is playing chess, you can't play checkers, right? You have to play the same game. You have to be able to match wits with your opponent in order to respond to your opponent and to beat your opponent. So how are we going to respond to these challenges unless we also have a systematic approach and a systematic response? Otherwise, if we don't have a systematic response, we have to just address one issue today, and then tomorrow another issue comes up about women's rights. Next day it's about secularism. Next day is about LGBT in Islam. The next day, every single day there's going to be a new issue, a new controversy, a new source of doubt. And we're just, playing whack-a-mole. You know whack-a-mole? Right? And it's a carnival game. You just, one mole, head comes up, you whack it. Next one, you whack it, and so forth. This is not productive. This is not an intelligent approach and response. So, but we don't have, as individuals or as parents, you don't have time to go and study philosophy. You don't have time to go and understand the systematic problem. You don't have time for that. You can't go back to school. So this is something that myself, others, are dedicating ourselves to, is actually going to the root of these ideologies, going to the usul, and addressing them on that level. So that once you cut the roots of these isms and these ideologies, then you address the source of the problem. And once you address the source, then that's the kind of systematic response that will, bi'idhnillah, help so many of our youth and so much of the Muslim community facing these questions and these shubuhats and doubts. One thing that I want to address now is this question of intellectual approaches to Islam. How do we intellectually address doubts? Does intellectual revival have any place in Islam? So let me tell you a story of the greatest general that the world has ever seen. Who is the greatest general of history? Khalid ibn Walid. Have you heard of the Sahabi? Khalid ibn Walid. He is recognized as, even by non-Muslims, as the greatest, one of the greatest, if not the greatest general of history. And imagine he was able to conquer one of the superpowers of his time, which is the Persian Empire. He was, as the general, he led the Muslims towards conquering Persia. And even he could have, Allahu A'lam, but he could have even conquered Rome, which was the second superpower of the time. Persia and Rome. And his military prowess and knowledge was world-renowned by that time. By the time he had finished with the Persians, everyone knew Khalid ibn Walid. He's one of these Arabs with this new religion. And he's conquering everyone. And so he had even struck fear into the hearts of the Romans, because they were afraid that they were going to be next. They were going to be the next ones that are conquered by the Muslims. But, that didn't happen. Khalid ibn Walid's career was cut short. But his life is something that we should reflect on. His life is something we should reflect on. And how he became Muslim is very interesting, and this is where I want to put emphasis, is he had actually been the main person that had given the Muslims defeat in the Battle of Uhud. He was actually the one that caused the Muslims to lose in the Battle of Uhud. And after that, he started slowly having doubts about the religion that he was upon and his alliance with the Quraysh. And he slowly started considering Islam because his brother had become Muslim. And his brother had said something very interesting and very important to him. His brother told him that it amazes me that someone as intelligent as you does not recognize the truth of Islam. Someone as intelligent as you has not recognized the truth of Islam. And so that started to get him thinking that, well, I do consider myself intelligent. Why don't I see that Islam is the truth? I feel this attraction to the Prophet ﷺ and to Islam, but he wasn't entirely convinced. But then the Prophet ﷺ told or asked Khalid's older brother, Walid ibn Walid, where's Khalid? Where's Khalid? Because someone as intelligent as Khalid should recognize the truth of Islam. So the Prophet ﷺ re-emphasized intelligence, that Khalid is intelligent. He should recognize the truth of Islam. And so this is very important for us to understand how intelligence and being intellectual is correlated with Iman. Because what does it mean to be intelligent? How do we define this? This is very important. It's very important for us to have an understanding of intelligence because our youth, our children, okay, and I'm a father myself. I have 4 boys. And I'm trying to raise them in this world and protect them from all of these attacks. And so how do we define intelligence for our youth such that they're not going to be confused? What are we going to say to our youth when they say, Baba, Mama, why are all the smartest people in the world atheists? Why are all the greatest scientists and researchers and academics, why are they atheists or why are they non-Muslims? How are we going to answer this question? This is a very easy, obvious question for a child to think. Even if they don't ask it, even if they don't articulate it, maybe they are thinking that. Maybe they are wondering why. So we have to define intelligence. We have to define our own terms. We shouldn't let others define terms for us. We should accept the definition that Allah has given, that the Prophet ﷺ has given for these terms, like intelligence and aql, reason. And there's an amazing narration from the Prophet ﷺ where he is describing the signs of Yawm al-Qiyamah, the signs of the end of time. And one of them is amazing because he says that in the end of time, a man will be complimented for his intelligence. And people will say, wow, he's so intelligent, he's so broad-minded, he's so intellectual, and he won't have any iman in his heart. That's the time we're living in. That's the time we're living in, where the most intellectual and intelligent people, those who are considered to be the most intelligent and the most intellectual, are not Muslim and they have no iman. In fact, they're atheists. They even deny God. So we live in that time, whereas in the past, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was the opposite. You couldn't be considered intelligent unless you had iman. You couldn't be considered intelligent unless you had iman. So now things have flipped. Everything is backward. And this is proven in several different ways. One is the example of Khalid ibn Walid, that the Prophet ﷺ was amazed that someone so intelligent was not a Muslim, was not a believer, had not recognized reality, because that's what intelligence is. Let's define intelligence. Okay? Intelligence means recognizing reality, seeing reality. And what is the greatest reality? Al-Haq. It's Allah. The existence of Allah. That Allah is Rabb. Allah is the Lord and the Creator, and that we worship Him. That is the greatest truth. So how can you be intelligent? How can you be intelligent if intelligence is recognizing the truth, if you don't recognize Allah and you don't submit to Him as a Muslim and worship Him? And just as a caveat, when I was growing in my understanding of Islam, it's a learning process. So just in case someone is not in a position where they have fully understood and accepted with yaqeen, with full certainty, all the tenets of Islam and Iman, the pillars of Iman, you shouldn't be worried that, oh, well, am I not a Muslim now? Or, ooh, maybe I have left Islam. So any of our youth who are facing those kinds of doubts, just because you have doubts now doesn't mean you're not going to learn more. So you should always seek knowledge and not feel like your Iman is at stake or your Iman is going to be lost just because you don't have full certainty and yaqeen at this time. Everyone is working on their Iman, and as the Prophet ﷺ said, you go through different levels of Iman at different times. You feel different levels of closeness to Allah at different times. So I just want to put that out there as well, without taking away from what I want to highlight and emphasize, which is you cannot be considered intelligent without Iman. And this is what we need to teach our youth, so that they understand from a young age who are the role models. Who are the role models? Who do they consider intelligent, smart? Who are they looking up to? Are they looking up to atheists, those who deny God, those who deny Allah, those who deny Islam? Or do they have scholars of Islam as their role models? Or the Anbiya? Do they understand that the Anbiya are the most intelligent of all creation? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ibrahim alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam, Musa alayhi salam. When you read their stories, you can just see their intelligence, their wisdom, their knowledge. And then look at the inheritors of the prophets, which are the scholars, the ulama. These need to be our role models, not only spiritually. This is the problem that we fall into. We say, yes, of course we respect the ulama. We respect Imam Abu Hanifa. We respect Imam Ahmad, Imam Al-Shafi, Imam Malik. Of course, we respect them as spiritual, moral guides, leaders, intellectuals. But we don't consider them to be geniuses. We don't consider them to be intellectual role models. This is the problem that we have, where intelligence has been defined for us. And we've been indoctrinated into accepting a definition of intelligence that contradicts Islam and puts Islam in a bad light. Another example is how some of our youth have accepted this idea that you need a leap of faith. To be Muslim, you need a leap of faith because you can't, again, know that God exists with certainty. You have to have a leap of faith. Has anyone heard this expression, leap of faith? It's a Christian idea. It's coming from Christian philosophy. And the idea that they had was that you cannot rationally recognize God. You cannot rationally justify God. You have to make a leap. Blindly. You blindly believe. Because reason and religion are two separate things. They're incompatible. As soon as you leave the realm of reason, that's the place of faith. And as soon as if you want to be reasonable, you have to put faith aside. You have to abandon your faith. This is how they have defined for us rationality, reason, reasonability. We have to redefine these terms in light of the Quran and Sunnah. So what does Allah say about haqq? Many things. Allah is, in the Quran, constantly refers to قَوْمِ يَعْقِلُونَ. Right? So Allah says, قَدْ بَيَّنَّا لَكُمُ الْآيَاتِ إِن كُنْتُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. Okay? We have clarified, بَيِّنَّا, for you, لَكُمُ الْآيَاتِ, the signs, our signs, if you reason, if only you were to reason. Okay? إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمِ يَعْقِلُونَ. Indeed, in this are signs for those of reason. Right? إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لَآيَاتٍ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, meaning those of insight, those of understanding. Allah uses the term أُولِي الْأَبْصَارِ, أُولِي النُّهَى, أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, قَوْمِ يَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Don't you understand? Aren't you people of reason, reflection? Constantly reminding us that you have to be able to recognize the signs around you, in the world, in the dunya. This is not unseen. The signs of Allah are not part of the ghaib. This is a misconception. This is a misconception that we can't recognize the signs of Allah that point that, yes, Allah is one. Allah is the creator. Islam is the deen of truth. There are signs in the world around us and within our own selves that we have to recognize. It's not blind faith. If you have reason, if you have rationality, then there's only one conclusion: that Islam is the truth. And if you don't recognize that reality, then you can't be considered rational. You can't be considered reasonable. You can't be considered intelligent. So you might say, well, Daniel, why don't you distinguish between a dunyawi sense of intelligence and a spiritual intelligence? Daniel, why don't you recognize that Stephen Hawking or Albert Einstein, weren't they intelligent? Weren't they intelligent as well? How can you deny this? But I do deny this. We must deny this. Their intelligence, if they can be called intelligence, is far from complete. They can't be considered intelligent when they see the world around us and they don't reflect and they don't understand that this didn't just come from nowhere. That this is not for no purpose. How can you think that? How can you understand your own purpose as a person? Everyone has goals. Everyone has aspirations in our lives, in our personal lives. Right? You might have a job, you might be going to college, you might be in high school, but you have a goal in life for yourself. How can you, when you're located, when you're within the universe, How can you have a purpose, but the universe itself has no purpose, has no direction, has no end? How does that make sense? Where does your purpose come from? These are the kinds of reflections that a person of reason, rationality, intelligence has to make. The signs are around us. They're not part of the ghaib. They're not unseen. So no, I don't think that Stephen Hawking or Albert Einstein are geniuses or they're intelligent. And I studied physics. So at Harvard I studied physics, and some of my professors and advisors were Nobel Prize winners as well. They were considered the top physicists in the world. I talked to them, I interacted with them, I took classes with them. I wouldn't consider them intelligent. The way that I think about their abilities are that they're savants. What, have you heard of the word savant? It means someone who has a very particular skill that's super, super specific. So in chess, for example, you can have a chess savant. Someone who's very, very good at chess. And you'll see them, they have events where there will be 50 people who come to play chess against one person. And that one chess savant, chess genius, will play all 50 people at the same time, blindfolded, and win 50 games. So this is a savant, meaning this is some unnatural, highly unusual ability that they have in chess. You have savants in video games. They're just at such a high level of ability that no one can match. And in physics, it's the same thing. In physics, it's the same thing. They're physics savants. But remember how we define intelligence. Intelligence is recognition of reality. But who gets to define what reality is? Who gets to define what reality is? Those who are materialists and atheists, they have defined reality as the physical world, the material world, atoms and molecules. They assert, dogmatically, blindly assert that there is no higher reality beyond what we see and touch and feel in terms of atoms and molecules. So according to their understanding of reality, then yes, a physicist, they would consider to be intelligent because the physicist understands or allegedly understands reality because he's or she is able to do physics. But we don't have to accept their definition. We don't have to submit to their definition of what reality is. Why would we? Why would we? Their understanding of reality changes every generation. I studied physics, I studied the philosophy of physics and science. The scientific reality in the time of Isaac Newton is very different than the scientific reality 200 years later when Albert Einstein came. And he redefined physics. And then later it was redefined again. And again and again. Science goes through revolutions. Science changes in big, significant ways. And your entire conception of what is real undergoes massive shifts. We're talking about atoms and molecules. Well, the physicists today, they say an atom is an illusion. An atom is an illusion. That's old talk. That's old science. Now we know the reality is not about atoms. It's about quarks. Quarks, the subatomic particle that they call quarks, and hadrons, and bosons, and the Higgs boson, and so on, all these different particles. That's the reality. And then there are even other physicists who say, no, the reality is strings. It's not even particles, it's strings. That's the reality. So even amongst themselves, there's khilaf. They disagree, even amongst themselves, on what is reality. So why should we accept those who, they're just engaged in speculation, dhann? They have no certain knowledge. But we have certain knowledge. We have revelation. We have the Quran. We have the Sunnah. This is what we should anchor ourselves to intellectually. This is what we should anchor our definition of intelligence. And as parents and educators, we have to plug in our children and our youth into these definitions, into these concepts. We can't let others and other ideologies define the terms for us. We have to play the same game and better than that. So I mentioned why it's so important to redefine intelligence and intellectual revival in terms of Islam for our youth. But also think about da'wah. Think about da'wah. How are we going to invite others to Islam if others think of Islam as stupid, irrational, immoral? How can we invite others and say, accept Islam. We invite you to good. Accept Islam. Allah says in the Quran, "Ud'u fi sabili rabbik bil hikmah wal maw'izatil hasanah." Invite to or call to the way of your Lord bil hikmah, meaning with wisdom and good advice. And Allah also says in that same ayah, "Jadilhum billati hiya ahsan." Argue with them or debate with them. Jadilhum billati, with what is best. So again, this is a command from Allah. Allah is saying to argue and debate. And Allah wouldn't command us to do something if it were not possible. You see, the thing is that some people today, some Muslims, will say that, look, we have our religion, they have their religion, we are just going to practice and keep to ourselves privately. We don't need to argue with anyone. We don't need to try to convince anyone of the truth of Islam. It's fine. And they can insult us, and they can attack Islam. That's fine. We're just peaceful. We're in our own corner, and we don't need to engage. This is wrong. This is a big problem, because our youth are going to slowly leave, because you can't be told over and over and over again that what you believe and what you subscribe to in your life is irrational and immoral. You can't hear that over and over again and maintain your iman. It's slowly going to cause you doubts, and then you're going to have problems, big problems. And then, like I said, we can't do da'wah. How can we call people to Islam if we don't respond to objections, if we don't respond to attacks? If I come up to you and I say, and I start insulting your mother, I start insulting your father, I say that, look, your mother and your father, they're stupid, they're irrational, are you going to say, oh, okay, and walk away and not respond? Not even have the bravery to say, no, that's not true, not even to deny them? No, of course, you're going to be emotional. You're going to say, no, that's not true. Don't say these things about my mom or my dad. How come we don't have that sense of ghairah, that sense of protective jealousy for Islam? How can we allow others to constantly attack and we have nothing to respond with? So it is our duty to have intellectual responses and to challenge our opponents. And we do this first and foremost by defining our own terms and setting the frame of our discourse. So,
What's the time?
all right. So let me wrap up then, inshallah. When it comes to practical things to do with your children, I think it's very important to control the sources of information. The sources of information. It's a very easy idea, but it's difficult to implement. As parents, do you know what are the primary sources of influence on your children? Huh? Social media? TV? Okay, that's very generic. Because do you know what on social media or TV, do you know what your kids are watching? Do you know who your kids are following? Do you know those details? My point is that it's very difficult to keep track. And especially as they grow older, but for younger children, that's when we have to start setting good habits and having a very solid grasp of what are our children consuming? Who are they following? What are they reading? What are they watching? And if you don't have good channels of communication with your children, they're not going to tell you. They're not going to tell you these things. So you're going to be in the dark. You're not going to know. And so you don't know what you don't know. If your child has doubts about Islam, they have these questions, most likely they're not going to come and talk to you about it. Right? And then, may Allah protect us from this. One day they come and say, oh, guess what? I'm not praying anymore. I'm not fasting. Or I don't feel like going to the masjid anymore. It's not really my scene. And then you wonder, well, what happened? 12 years of Islamic school, right? Because Islamic school is just 8 hours a day, maybe 40 hours a week. But what about the rest of the time outside of school? The rest of the hours of the week? And even within Islamic school, what about between classes? What about under the desk with friends? There are all these influences. And I know that you know all of these things. You're aware of these influences, but it's good to remind. It's good to remind that what is the most concerning is the ideologies that are being transmitted through these media, through social media, through internet, through TV, through movies, through music. Through music, right? So many different messages that are embedded. They're hidden. If you don't know what to look for, if you don't know what these ideologies are, you're not going to recognize them. So, I think that we as a community have to dedicate resources to understanding what these ideologies are. What is the source of these doubts? What are the source of these questions? So that we can inoculate. Just like there are vaccines. We use vaccines to prevent the possibility of infection. Okay, so we have to do the same thing intellectually, ideologically. How do we do that? That's a question that I can't give you the complete answer to in just this short session. Inshallah, in December, Brother Hassan is organizing a program where I'll be coming back, inshallah, to Tampa and teaching an intensive, 5-day intensive, where we go into all of the major ideologies that are attacking Islam and affecting youth and the entire Ummah, actually, in detail. We talk about atheism, we talk about materialism, we talk about secularism, we talk about liberalism, feminism, LGBT, evolution, all of these things in depth. And we spend 8 hours a day for 5 days on these topics, where not only we try to understand these ideologies, because that's easy. If anyone can understand these ideologies, If you have the time, you can read about them online. But it's not just about understanding the ideology. You have to take the extra step of showing how Islam is superior, how Islam provides the superior option, how Islam is more rational, Islam is more moral than what the secular scientific world has to offer. Because if you give youth two options, this is Islam and this is all of these popular isms, and you don't explain why one is better than the other, then they'll just choose whichever one is most popular and which one is more easy to accept. You have to take the extra step of actually justifying. So inshallah that will be in December, and I think Brother Hassan will explain some of the details of that. And may Allah make us people of haqq. May Allah protect our youth and our children and guide them and protect them from shubuhat and doubts and give them full confidence and yaqeen and keep them on the straight path. Ya Rab. Ameen. Subhanallah. Sure.
Anyone have any questions?
Questions or comments?
Go ahead.
I enjoyed every minute that how you were talking. I think it's great.
Jazakallah khair.
Go ahead.
How about sisters if they have questions? They
Well,
can
you have mentioned,
Hold on, me. No, that's it.
Okay, if sisters have any questions, they can text Brother Hassan.
you mentioned systematic, their approach causing doubts in our youth. And we should have a systematic approach to respond to. So there's a night to come in 5 days and probably talk about this. But some of us don't have the opportunity to defend that. Do we have here like a website or something where we have put like 20 or 30 doubts for the beginning and what is their response? And one can learn, because I was just waiting for the whole lecture, how we looked at that. But really, how do you think that the kuffar are living in this living, but how do we, what caused them to leave this kuffar? And how can we kind of find out what it happened? And how we can stop it?
Yeah, so let me repeat the question. The question is, what resources are there already to help with doubts and questions, and then what specific doubts cause our youth to leave Islam? So as for resources, I have a lot of writing online. I've been writing and researching for about 10 years now. And you can go to my website. It's Muslim Skeptic, skeppic.com. And people find it a strange name, Muslim Skeptic. What is the meaning of that? And the meaning is that usually we think of a skeptic as someone who doubts or has questions about religion and interrogates religion. But we can turn that on its head. We can turn the tables and say, well, there are all these dogmas and all these ideologies that people accept blindly, like feminism, secularism, liberalism, evolution, scientism. We need to question those. We need to be skeptical in those ideologies and attack them. And so that's where the name Muslim Skeptic comes from. As for doubts, there are many different questions that the youth have nowadays. One of the big ones is the place of women in Islam, women's treatment in Islam, differences in fiqh between men and women. That's one of the big ones. Also LGBT. Why doesn't Islam recognize that a man and a man can love each other, love is love, all of these things that they're constantly being fed through social media, through the political and public discourse. So how can we empower our youth to understand this issue? We can tell them about Qawm Lut We can tell them about what Allah says in the Quran about this behavior, same-sex behavior. But that's not enough these days, because the enemies of Islam and the promoters of this kind of behavior have a response already to that. They say, well, the Quran, this is, referring to some other practice, or this is for old times, it's not as relevant. What can you find possibly wrong with this kind of behavior? For some people, it's natural. And so there's all kinds of moral argumentation that they use, and they consider it to be rational argumentation. How can Muslims respond to that? You can't just cite an ayah of the Quran or hadith. In order to address that issue, you have to have your own argument to be able to respond. And so I have an essay on this topic. You can read it through the website that I mentioned, muslimskeptic.com. But many things beyond this as well. What?
So most of these issues are addressed in your reference on the website.
Yeah, many of them are addressed on the website, and the course addresses most of them.
If anyone else. Go ahead.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in the ideal world, we could have our children constantly be reading Islamic literature and getting that kind of education, but fortunately, it's a lot of other factors that seem to be impacting youth in this day and age.
One thing I was going to ask, I think in our society, one of the most elevated things is the human mind, and the human mind being the ultimate criterion for what's right and wrong, my rationality, my reasoning, my logic. And I think one thing as Muslims, we understand that guidance is not purely something that is rational. To think that our mind will be completely able to grasp everything is a sense of arrogance, right? And so I think the one thing I think that distinguishes us is the fact that yes, the mind and reason has its scope and has its limitation, but at the same time to set, for when people say in society that this is the ultimate criterion, that's a really big problem, because we know that our mind makes mistakes and our mind is limited. And that hidayah oftentimes is from Allah, and it's not necessarily basically, someone going to a philosophy class or someone going to a philosophy, session or whatever it may be. Oftentimes you'll find those people some of the most misguided, right? So I guess kind of, if you could touch upon the concept of the mind and this kind of elevation of the mind in our society, and how that in of itself takes away the concept of hidayah and the concept of Allah guiding people and guiding the hearts.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely, there are limits to our reason. And just like we have limits in our sight, we can't see through walls. Similarly, the mind is also limited, and the sense of reason is limited. But we have to recognize that this can be used as a cop-out. This can be used as a cop-out in the sense that whenever there's a challenge, Islam is challenged on something, we say, oh, this is beyond reason, we just have to accept it, when that's not necessarily the case. Like, for example, prevention, when Allah says, don't approach zina, this is a command that everyone understood in history as rational. This is something that is perfectly rational. Of course you don't engage in zina. And nowadays, since that's not in this culture, in the Western culture that's been disseminated across the world, that, yeah, what's wrong with premarital relations? What's wrong with that? Well, why can't we engage in fornication all we want? We don't see any problem with it. Then the Muslim response in some quarters is, oh, well, this is just ta'budi. It's not related to aqd. This is purely just a command that we have to blindly follow, and reason has nothing to do with it. So what changed? The only thing that changed is that the dominant culture changed, whereas as far as reason is concerned, of course, why would you engage in zina when it's such a destructive act for children who are born not knowing who their fathers are. And there's all kinds of even secular statistics, scientific statistics that show that children who are born out of wedlock in single-parent families or single-parent households are at greater risk to fall into crime, are greater risk of becoming homeless, are at greater risk of dropping out of school, are at greater risk of doing drugs, are at greater risk of falling into crime. He's at a much higher risk. Like, these are all established statistics. And it's obvious why. Like, you're growing up without knowing who your father is. It's an unstable household. There's going to be a much greater chance for all of these negative repercussions for the child. And if that child is growing up in society and then becoming a part of that society, that negativity will spread and affect and corrupt all of society. I don't want to live in a society where there's higher drug usage, higher joblessness, higher homeless rate, all of these things. It affects me personally. It affects all of us personally when others are engaged in zina. It's not a victimless crime as it's put in society nowadays. So yes, of course, this is a victim. There's victims in this crime, and we need to, we should look at the Sharia, which curbs this behavior, as being the most rational, the most moral approach. Okay? And this shows the superiority of Islam. This shows the truth of Islam, that this prohibition of zina is so firm and so solid, and our tradition has maintained that in a pristine way, whereas other faiths have abandoned it as soon as it became culturally unacceptable or unpopular. But reflecting on these things rationally, it boosts, the iman, and this is all rational. So, but going back to the original point of, the limits of reason. Yes, there are limits. Like, we don't know why Allah has prescribed 3 rakat for Maghrib, or why we fast in Ramadan as opposed to Shawwal or Sha'ban. These are ta'budi. Ta'budi means dealing with worship. Allah has just prescribed it. But the central truths of Islam, that Allah exists, was not considered to be just beyond human reason, beyond the aql. The truth of Islam itself was not considered beyond aql. This is another issue where youth are very confused. I get asked all the time, I believe in God, but I don't know why Islam is true. Like, why should I believe Islam is true? And then people are at a loss of how to respond to this very common question. So we have to be careful about this line of thought that, our aql is limited. Yes, absolutely, it is. At the same time, we shouldn't think that the main truths of Islam are not unreachable by reason, by aql. And there's no difference of opinion by this amongst the scholars of Islam historically.
Since we only have 2 minutes, can you just say the comments and then just give a final question? You got your hand up today?
What's the difference between intellect and wisdom? And can you have one without the other?
Yeah, there are different categories. So again, if we want to define them in Islamic terms, you have hikmah and you have aql. And so someone can have up, that's considered a very basic level, up. And this was actually the definition that was used for man. How the scholars of Islam wanted to know what is a good definition of man. And they said man is the rational animal. That's what distinguishes humans from the rest of the animal world, is that we have up. So that's the basic, as long as you're not crazy or you're not, a young child, you have the ability to reason and reflect. But hikmah is a higher level of intelligence. And intelligence as a word is, it's not an Arabic term, but we can use it as a gloss, as a general term, and then we define the details and the nuance using Arabic.
My comment was, I went to Islamic school here, a lot of brothers here went to Islamic school, and we graduated early 2000, and we never ever heard of anybody from our school or anything leaving Islam, ever. It was never, or even any of the schools mentioned it. But within the last couple of years, some of the graduates of our Islamic schools here have left Islam, And so, I've been trying to figure out what's changed in 15 years and 13 years that could, cause this. I mean, I found some research of, there's documents out there that, that they're,